The street was on fire, tear gas choking the air, shields slamming against unarmed people. A homeless veteran stood tall with his dog, refusing to move. A mother screamed as her child was nearly crushed. And a teenage girl, branded dangerous for the color of her skin, raised a torn sketchbook against a wall of riot gear. This was the night truth broke through lies, and the world could no longer look away. If you believe stories like this must be told, subscribe now, because what you're about to see will shake you to the core. Ravenwood had always been a city of contradictions. Its skyline gleamed like a crown of glass and steel, the kind you saw on postcards. But under those towers, the streets told another story: cracked sidewalks, soup kitchens overflowing, cops clearing out encampments like they were sweeping trash from the curb. On the edge of Jefferson Square, Frank Dawson sat hunched on a splintered park bench. The army jacket on his back was faded to the color of dust, the kind issued decades ago when he'd been shipped to the desert. Now it was his only shield against the December wind. At his feet lay Rex, a German shepherd with a white muzzle and tired eyes. Once, Rex had been a canine officer, trained to detect explosives. Now he was retired, discarded. Just like Frank, joggers in neon gear curved around them, careful not to get too close. One muttered, "Jesus, the city needs to clean this place." Up, another laughed. "Bet he spends his VA check on booze." Frank heard every word. He tugged Rex closer and whispered, "Ignore him, buddy. They don't know a damn thing." Across town, Maria Alvarez clutched her son Diego's hand as they sat in the waiting room of Ravenwood's housing office. The fluorescent light hummed overhead, buzzing like a fly. When her number was called, Maria carried a stack of crumpled papers to the desk. The clerk barely looked at her. "No permanent address, no steady income. You don't qualify." Maria's throat tightened. "But I've been on the list for 9 months. My boy, he needs somewhere safe." The clerk sighed, pushed the papers back across the counter. "Try the shelters, next." As she gathered her documents, she heard him mutter to a coworker, "Another one looking for a free ride." Diego tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, are we gonna get a house?" Maria forced a smile. "We'll figure something out, Mio." But inside, her hope shrank smaller than the stack of papers in her arms. At Roosevelt Middle School, Aaliyah Johnson sat in the back row, sketchbook balanced on her knees. She loved drawing more than anything: houses with gardens, families smiling, worlds that didn't laugh at her skin or her hair. Today's assignment was simple: draw your family. Aaliyah sketched her mom, who worked nights cleaning offices. She sketched herself. Then she drew Rex, the old dog she'd seen once at the park, a silent guardian she wished she had. But before she could finish, a boy snatched the paper from her desk. "Yo, check this out, welfare art," he jeered. Laughter filled the classroom. The teacher did nothing. Aaliyah bent down, picked up the crumpled sheet, and smoothed it with shaking hands. Her eyes stayed dry. She had learned not to give them her tears. Meanwhile, in the basement of Ravenwood Police Headquarters, Ethan Cole stared at lines of code scrolling across a terminal. A hacker once hailed as a prodigy, he now sat in a holding cell, facing years behind bars. His crime? Breaching a bank's firewall to expose vulnerabilities. He hadn't stolen a cent, but intent meant nothing to the law. Now, the cops had given him an offer: find the leak in our system, and we'll cut your sentence. But what Ethan uncovered wasn't a leak. It was a siphoned data streaming out of police servers, not stolen by outsiders, but channeled deliberately. Profiles of Ravenwood's most vulnerable residents: homeless vets, single mothers, immigrant kids being flagged as risks and copied to a server offshore. The terminal blinked with names: Dawson, Frank, veteran, homeless, PTSD, Alvarez, Maria, single mother, eviction pending, Johnson, Aaliyah, minor, at risk. Ethan's stomach knotted. These weren't files. They were lives. And someone was selling them. That night, outside a grocery store on 7th Avenue, Frank shuffled toward the entrance with a crumpled dollar in his hand, Rex at his side. The security guard stepped forward, scowling. No loitering. Frank raised his palms. Just here for bread. The guard's hand went to his radio. Got a transient with a dog. Possible disturbance. A patrol car pulled up within minutes. 2 officers stepped out, followed by Captain Richard Hayes himself, broad shoulders, crisp uniform, eyes sharp as glass. He sized Frank up like he was a stain on the sidewalk. Move him along, Hayes ordered flatly. Frank's chest tightened. I fought for this country. I got every right to buy food here. Hayes's lip curled. You fought. Past tense. Now you're blocking the store. Rex growled low in his throat. One officer's hand hovered near his holster. Shoppers stopped to watch, some lifting their phones. Someone muttered, dangerous. Frank clenched his fists. He wanted to fight. To scream, to demand dignity. But Rex pressed against his leg, grounding him. Slowly, he backed away, humiliation burning hotter than the winter wind. Across the street, Aaliyah watched with wide eyes, clutching her sketchbook. She couldn't shout, couldn't move. But her pencil flew across the page, capturing the scene. Veterans' bent shoulders, the dog's loyalty, the captain's cold authority. Her drawing became the only witness who cared. Back in the precinct, Ethan faced Hayes. This isn't a leak, Ethan said quietly. It's a system. You're selling people's lives. Hayes leaned close, his voice a blade. Justice is whatever we decide it is. Remember that. Ethan felt the weight of those words. And for the first time, he realized he wasn't here to fix the system. He was here to choose whether to burn it down. The city looked different at night. From the rooftops, Ravenwood glowed like a promise. From the streets, it felt like a threat. Frank sat with his back against a brick wall in an alley just off Jefferson Square. Rex curled beside him, ears twitching every time a bottle clinked or a siren wailed in the distance. Frank closed his eyes, but sleep never came easy. It wasn't just the cold concrete beneath him, it was the memories. Sandstorms whipping against his skin, a convoy exploding into fire. The sound of men screaming for medics who never came in time. He woke with a jolt, heart pounding. His chest ached as if the war had followed him home, refusing to let go. He stroked Rex's fur. You're the only one who gets it, boy, he whispered. The dog licked his hand, steady, loyal. But loyalty didn't buy food. Loyalty didn't keep the cops from pushing him off every corner he tried to rest on. To the city, Frank wasn't a veteran. He was just another problem to be moved along. Maria sat with Diego at St. Jude's shelter, waiting for their turn at dinner. The line stretched down the block. Inside, volunteers ladled soup into thin plastic bowls, their smiles tight, practiced. Diego clutched his mother's coat. Do we have a house yet? He asked. Maria's chest tightened. She wanted to lie. To tell him yes soon. Instead, she kissed the top of his head. We're working on it. When they finally sat down to eat, a woman across the table whispered bitterly, the city doesn't care. Unless you've got papers, you're invisible. Maria nodded silently. She had tried everything: job interviews, applications, pleading with social workers. But every time, doors slammed shut. Not qualified. Not eligible. Not our problem. At Roosevelt Middle, Aaliyah faced another day of whispers. Her classmates laughed at her hair, her clothes, the fact that she always brought free lunch trays. During gym, she tripped during a relay. The boys cheered like it was a comedy show. Aaliyah scrambled up, cheeks burning. You're useless, one muttered. That night, she filled page after page in her sketchbook. She drew herself taller, braver. She drew Frank standing like a statue, Rex by his side. She drew her mother's tired face transformed into a queen's crown. She drew a world that felt impossible. Deep in his cell, Ethan scrolled through the stolen files again. It wasn't just names. It was predictive tags, algorithms marking people at risk. Frank Dawson, flagged as unstable. Maria Alvarez, dependent liability. Aaliyah Johnson, future offender. Ethan clenched his fists. These weren't predictions. They were death sentences written in code. When Captain Hayes entered, Ethan spoke without thinking. "You're not protecting people. You're targeting them." Hayes's eyes were ice. "You think too much, Cole. Do your job." 2 nights later, it happened. Frank had found an old sleeping bag in the trash behind a church. He laid it out. Near the subway entrance, Rex curled tight beside him. It didn't last. A pair of officers approached, flashlights glaring. "Move along, old man." Frank sat up, blinking. "I'm not hurting anyone. This isn't a shelter. Get lost." "Rex!" barked once, low, protective. The younger officer stiffened, hand near his gun. "Control your animal. He's not dangerous." Frank protested. The older cop sneered. "Yeah? Tell that to the last guy who thought his mutt was harmless." A small crowd gathered, phones out. Aaliyah, walking home from tutoring, froze. On the sidewalk, her heart pounded as she lifted her sketchbook. She couldn't stop the scene, but she could record it the only way she knew how. When the officer stepped closer, Rex growled louder, teeth bared. The younger one shouted, "Leash that dog or I'll put it down." Frank's voice cracked. "He's all I've got." For a moment, time froze. Frank, trembling. Rex, braced to protect. The officers, hands twitching near their holsters. The crowd, silent, but recording. Finally, the older cop muttered, "Not worth the paperwork." "Let's go." They shoved Frank against the wall, then left. Frank slid down to the ground, shaking. He hugged Rex tight, whispering, "Good boy. Don't let him break us." Across the street, Aaliyah wiped at her eyes. On her page, she had drawn Rex not growling but glowing, a shield of light around him. That night, Ethan found the incident logged in the database, within minutes classified as transient disturbance. Subject, Dawson Frank. Potentially violent. Animal aggressive. He slammed his fist on the desk. They hadn't just humiliated Frank. They had turned it into evidence to justify the next crackdown. And in that moment, Ethan made a choice. He would not just trace the leak. He would expose it. The Westbridge overpass had always been a place the city wanted to forget. By day, commuters sped overhead in their cars, never looking down. By night, it became a fragile village, tents patched. Together from tarps, blankets strung between columns, small fires burning in rusted cans. For people like Frank Dawson, it wasn't a home, but it was the closest thing. He sat outside his tent that afternoon, Rex resting against his boot, while Maria Alvarez handed out slices of bread she had managed to buy. Children played with a half-deflated soccer ball. For one brief moment, there was laughter, thin but real. Then the rumble began. Engines, radios, the unmistakable clatter of Riot shields. Frank stiffened. "They're coming," he muttered. Rex growled low, ears sharp. A man with a phone lifted it high, already streaming. "They're clearing us out again. Everyone share this." His voice shook with adrenaline. Within minutes, squad cars blocked both ends of the street. Officers poured out in black armor, shields forming a wall. At their center strode Captain Richard Hayes, bullhorn in hand, face unreadable. Maria pulled Diego close. "Stay behind me," she whispered. The boy's eyes widened as he watched the line of helmets advancing. Aaliyah Johnson, clutching her sketchbook, slipped into the crowd at the edge. She hadn't meant to come this far, but something had pulled her here, the need to see, to record. She perched on a low wall, pencil already in hand. Hayes raised the bullhorn. His voice boomed, flat and official. "This encampment is unauthorized. You have 10 minutes to vacate the premises." The crowd erupted. "Where do you expect us to go?" someone shouted. "We got kids here." Another yelled. Frank stepped forward, voice raw. "This is all we have. You can't just sweep us away like garbage." Hayes's gaze cut to him, cold as glass. "You've had your warning. 10 minutes. Phones rose higher, live streams buzzing with comments. Tens of thousands were already watching. Ethan Cole, locked in his cell downtown, watched the data populate across his screen. Operation Westbridge sweep. Status pending. His stomach clenched. He could see the tags already lining up the side. Names: transient, hostile, at risk. The story was being written before the first baton even swung. The countdown started without a clock. It lived in people's bodies, in the way shoulders tensed, in the way hands tightened around bag straps, in the way mothers counted breaths in a child's hair. Voices thinned and sharpened. The murmur of traffic above the overpass sounded like an audience holding back its cough. 10 minutes, Hayes had said, and then the officers began to move like men dismantling a stage. They fanned out in teams of 3, one photographed each tent. The second lifted the flap with a baton and shouted, "Police!" The third tagged the pole with orange tape. A city worker rolled in a bin for debris. Nothing in the bin looked like debris. It looked like Tuesday. It looked like lives. Frank watched them mark the corner tent with the blue tarp, the one with the old space heater and the hand-painted sign that read, "Please knock sleeping." "That's Eddie's," he said mostly to Rex. "God help him if they wake Eddie wrong." Rex's ears twitched, picking up the strain in Frank's voice, the rhythm of approaching boots. A young cop badge smudged, chin nicked by a fresh shave step too close to Frank's cooking pot. "You'll need to clear this," he said. It could have been gentle. It wasn't. The officer nudged the pot with his boot so the lid rattled. Rex rose in a single motion, shoulder to shoulder with Frank. A low growl vibrated through the leash. "I said back it up," Frank warned. The old soldier in him didn't shout. He issued orders. The young cop's jaw clicked. He took exactly one step back, the kind that says "I'm complying, and I hate it." On the live stream, comments raced in a waterfall. "Who was the guy? You. The dog is that Cap Hayes. They're clearing kids. What the hell? Share this, share this, share this." Maria had tied Diego's scarf too tight in her panic. She loosened it and pressed his face into her coat, turning his eyes toward the cloth, so he wouldn't see the officer yank someone's mattress like he was shaking crumbs off a tablecloth. "Count for me," she said, because counting was a raft, 1 to 20. He whispered numbers into her collarbone. Each one landed like a tap on her heart. "Alive, alive, alive." Aaliyah climbed from the low wall to a concrete abutment for a better view. The stinging smell of bleach hung in the air. Someone had already started spraying the concrete, pre-cleaning a place that wasn't yet empty. She started to draw. She blocked out the noise like she always did, narrowing the world to lines and light, shield curves, helmet edges. The way tear gas canisters sat fat and innocent in a mesh bag on a belt. She didn't draw faces. She drew angles and postures and the weight of a hand on a baton. Her pencil snagged on the rough paper where her fingers shook. Hayes watched the crowd the way a chess player studies the middle game. His bullhorn dangled from one hand. He was looking for the hinge where to apply pressure so the door swung. Clean. He saw it. The cluster of tents closest to the sidewalk, the ones people had dragged together in a show of togetherness. Break that cluster, and the rest would fold. He lifted 2 fingers. A wedge team moved as if the pavement itself were instructing them. Ethan mapped everything on a screen that didn't show the smell, didn't show the sting. He had his tiny kingdom of numbers and a pulse in his throat that wouldn't slow. In one window, live incident feed timestamps, GPS notches, officer IDs. In another, a scrape he'd laid hours ago, quietly siphoning audit logs. Who tagged what? Who authorized which purge? In a third, the offshore server, a name so bland it sounded like a lie, gliding data in and out. He had found a seaman old, Vendor account left open, the digital equivalent of a door no one remembered to lock, and he had slid a hook through it. One command now would clone and scatter. Not yet. Collect. He needed something that wasn't arguable. Under the overpass, the wedge hit the cluster. Shields pressed. Plastic crackled. Back! 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 The words became percussion. A lanky teenager grabbed 2 tent poles and shouted, "You can't take this." The nearest officer tore the poles free so fast the tent collapsed like a lung. Someone inside yelped. That was the moment sound changed. The crowd's noise rose from complaint to panic. Not a lot. Just a half step. Enough to lift the hairs on arms. Enough that Rex's growl shaded into a bark. Frank shifted to keep Rex slightly behind his leg, arm firm across the dog's chest. "Easy," he said. "I'm here." His voice did something inside the dog that Frank never could have explained. Years ago, on a road full of sand and heat shimmer, they had taught one another what that particular tone meant. It meant, "I will." "Stand in front of you." The young cop with the smudged badge had circled back. He wasn't brave now. He was jumpy. He jabbed a baton toward Frank's ribs, a small warning that carried more insult than pain. Frank didn't move. "You got orders," he said quietly. "And I got bones that don't heal like they used to. You aim that stick again. Aim it at me, not at him." He tipped his head at Rex. Baton boy puffed his chest. "Leash the animal or it gets put down." He said it like a script. He said it to be heard by the camera that had swung his way. "It's my service dog," Frank said. "Not anymore." The cop shot back, and the words were cheap. But they were lighter fluid on something. Burning in Frank's gut. Maria saw an opening in the line and hustled toward the edge of the encampment, thinking she could sneak Diego out to the street, away from the worst of it. A different officer stepped into her path and squared his shield. She stopped short. "Please," she said, and the shield didn't look like a shield. It looked like a wall someone had manufactured on purpose for people like her. The officer didn't shove her with the shield. He placed it into her body. The difference was semantic. She stumbled back anyway. Diego's numbers tumbled into a sob. 5 minutes. A voice barked over the bullhorn. Haze. Calm. Administrative. He didn't need volume. He had the machine. Aaliyah drew faster. She shaded the reflection of the highway lights in the convex curve of a shield. She sketched the triangle pattern cut into the tread of Haze's boots. She drew Rex with the thick, soft pencil strokes that made his fur look like real fur. She almost swallowed the noise, but one sound braided through everything else. A woman crying in Spanish, the particular cadence of mother fear. Aaliyah's hand paused. She found Maria in the crowd and sketched the line of her back, the shoulder blade wings under a cheap coat. In the data, Ethan saw the label auto-attached to the incident, civil disobedience moderate. In a heartbeat, it flicked to civil disorder escalating. He hadn't seen any baton cams yet. The system had toggled body cams to buffering mode. Someone had made that decision. He traced the toggle to an admin token with a neat name, Captain_RH. He didn't swear. He didn't have time. He forked the stream with a line of code and began saving the buffer to a hidden bucket he controlled. The city thought it was recording for later upload. Now so was he. The wedge team tore down another tent. A woman with gray hair shoved a raised hand against a shield. The shield came down on her wrist. Someone screamed. A plastic storage bin toppled and rattled across asphalt, its lid popping free. The contents spilled. A stack of letters, a child's sneaker, a Bible with a rubber band around it. An officer kicked the bin toward the debris cart without looking. The young cop jabbed again. He didn't know why. He did it because he was afraid and wanted to be the one making fear. Frank lifted an elbow to take the brunt. It was the wrong move. Pain shot along the old scar on his shoulder. The world tilted. Rex surged to fill the space that Frank's pain had opened. His bark cracked, startling and huge in the underpass. The baton froze in midair. Fingers twitched toward holsters. Someone yelled, "Dog!" The way someone yells, "Gun!" And the word itself ignited a panic that hadn't existed a second before. "Hey!" Frank's voice was rough stone. "Hey, watch your damn hands, he's fine. Leash it." Baton boy again. The baton shook in his fist. "I am leashing." "Him," Frank said, and held up the loop he had threaded through his wrist the entire time. The motion bearing his forearm showed the old army tattoo, blurry with age. Hayes was there now, not moving fast but simply appearing where the hinge was. "Dawson," he said, reading the name off a HUD in his optic, or a printout later he would. "Pretend to remember. This area is closed." Frank swallowed the sarcasm that rose, "Closed like a store? Closed like a heart?" He said, "Where would you like me to sleep, Captain? Name a place on your nice map." Hayes didn't look at the map. He looked at the camera. His eyes had learned to find lenses like a plant finds sun. "This is an enforcement action," he said, and the phrase flattened everything human into a policy. "Comply. Tres minutos." Someone shouted from the other end of the overpass. It wasn't Hayes. It was a cop relaying the countdown. In the language of the people the city pretended not to have. The livestream chat surged. "They're spraying something that's tear gas, right? Oh my God, the kid who was the captain. Say his name Hayes. Captain Hayes." A canister clinked on concrete near the far column, then hissed like a snake. White fog unfurled, sweet and acrid. The first wave hit eyes, then throats. People stumbled backward. Hands up, hands out, trying to touch air that wouldn't burn. Maria turned her face into Diego's curls, but gas doesn't care about hair. It slipped around her coat and into both their mouths. Diego gagged. A bright thread of snot swung from his nose and caught on her scarf. She barely felt the humiliation. She was busy finding the sound of his breathing under the noise. "1," she said, counting for him now. 2, 3, because counting was oxygen. Aaliyah's eyes flooded. Tears streamed, hot and involuntary. Her drawing smeared where a drop landed, and the smear made Rex look like he glowed. She wiped her face with her sleeve, leaving a gray streak across her cheek. Someone slammed a shoulder into her leg. She toppled from the abutment and hit the ground hard enough to fuzz the edges of everything. The sketchbook flew. Pages pinwheeled. She crawled, palms scraping open on grit, and snatched one page any page before a boot stamped it into mud. It was the one of Frank's back, the one where she'd drawn the stubbornness in the curve of his spine. She clutched it to her chest and coughed. Ethan's screen spiked red on a dozen nodes chemical deployment logged. Dispersal authorized. Shoulder cam still buffering. He toggled his script to aggressive. The buffers flushed into his bucket in chunks, file names that looked random, but were not. He rewrote a permissions policy with the kind of speed you only get when fear is a metronome and rage is caffeine. He pinged a burner account that would wake a reporter who didn't know he existed. Not yet. He hovered his finger over enter and told himself, more. Get enough that when they call it a riot, you can show a grandmother's wrist and a child's breath. Under the smoke, Frank felt his throat grab like a fist. He crouched, bringing Rex with him, making himself small, making a roof of his ribs. Over the dog's head. "With me," he rasped, and Rex tucked himself exactly where the old training lived. Someone shoved Frank's shoulder. He slid on his heel but didn't fall. Another baton nicked his ear. It felt hot, and then wet trickled. Down his neck, he tasted iron. "Get the animal." A voice shouted close, too close. A hand grabbed at Rex's collar from the wrong side, the side that meant offense in every training course Frank had ever taken. Frank moved without deciding. He slapped the hand away and put himself between the hand and the dog. The baton swung. From the other side, fast and thoughtless. It caught him high, not full force, but enough to flash white at the edges of his vision. "Stop!" The word came raw from Aaliyah, who didn't realize until she heard it that she'd said it. She was small in the crush, her voice small, but people turned anyway because small and true cuts through noise. She held up her paper like it was a badge. It was just graphite, but graphite remembers. Hayes heard the stop from somewhere inside the fog and tracked it to the girl with a sheet of paper. For a second, an odd expression moved through his face, a memory of a daughter's voice. Then, it smoothed. He did not order the gas off. He did not order more. He did what men like him do when the camera is on. He inserted a statement into the world. This is an unlawful assembly. Disperse now to avoid arrest. Arrest curled out of the word like a tail. 2 officers peeled off and moved toward Maria, who had turned sideways to shield Diego from the crowd's current. "Ma'am, you need to leave," one said. She tried to step. The edge of a collapsed tent snared her ankle, elastic and mean. Her knee buckled. She fell on her hip with a sound that wasn't loud, but was decisive. Diego slid, knees skinned, palms searched for mother. A man in a hoodie grabbed Maria's elbow and hauled her up before the crowd could fold over her. "I got you," he said, and hope is sometimes exactly 2 words. In Ethan's window, a tag attached to a fresh record, minor present at disturbance Johnson, Aaliyah. He watched the system bend truth into prophecy and wanted to put his fist through the monitor, through the wall, through whatever part of the world thought a 12-year-old with a pencil was a future threat. Now, he told himself. And he hit enter. The buffers began to duplicate outward to mirrors. He'd spun up on servers with names like Cloud Math Lab and Benign Cron East. If the city pulled a plug, the copies would keep running. The wedge team had cleared half the cluster. The debris cart groaned with a weight no one would call by its right name. A second gas canister rolled to a stop near a shopping cart full of blankets and baby clothes. It hissed. The blankets absorbed the fog like kindness absorbing blame. Hayes lowered the bullhorn and watched the edge of the crowd. He wasn't looking at the people. He was looking at the tide. Was it rising or falling? It rose when a baton flashed. It fell when someone found a gap and slipped away. A tremor of movement caught his eye, a sliver of space opening near the north column. For a moment, he saw a way for the crowd to move out without breaking. He hesitated, just long enough for the thought to form. Then he set his jaw. He held the line. Frank drew a breath that bit like glass. He got his feet under him and braced a hand on the column, feeling the old concrete grit. He looked at Hayes, through the white fog, and thought, for a strange second, of a lieutenant he had once known who believed that force was a sermon. He wanted to say something that would make this man see him. Instead, he coughed and spat pink onto the ground. "I fought for this country," he said, and it sounded tired only because the truth gets tired long before it gets heard. "And this is how you treat us." Phones lifted. The sentence rippled, stamped on 100 clips. It wasn't eloquent. It didn't need to be. It was the unanswerable math of a whole day. Somewhere to the right, a bottle shattered. Not thrown, knocked. From a hand. It made no difference to the narrative building itself in certain minds. Someone shouted weapon, as if intention could be assigned by echo. A baton rose like punctuation. Rex's bark cracked the air again, warning and declaration. The nearest gun cleared leather an inch and stuck there, the officer's training, holding the last inch like a cliff's lip. Frank threw both arms wide, palms out. "Don't you do it," he said, not loud, but with a certainty you learn when you see death up close too many times. "Don't you make yourself into something you can't get back from." The officer blinked. A sliver of human slid back into his face. The gun stayed at that exact wrong half height for a long second, then eased down. In the crowd's memory, it would always have been higher. The gas thinned. That's how it goes: first choke, then thin, then hang. People coughed so hard they tasted battery. Some backed away, stumbling into the staggered daylight beyond the overpass. Some stayed, because where would they go? A siren's Doppler wailed and receded. A baby hiccuped in a rhythm that made someone laugh once. Mad and brief, Aaliyah sat on the asphalt, legs splayed, the single sheet of paper crushed against her chest. She looked up through the sting and found Frank's face. He looked older than in her sketch, and somehow kinder. She lifted the paper like a toast. It was a stupid gesture. It was everything. He nodded at her, a soldier's nod across a field. Ethan's monitor filled with green check marks, copies complete. He exhaled for the first time in minutes. His heart didn't slow. He opened a new window and began to write. He didn't write code. He wrote words, timestamps, officer IDs, the way the tag changed from civil disobedience to disorder before the first canister fell. He typed the sentence he'd heard through a clipped body cam mic. Leash the animal or it gets put down. He typed a name, Captain Richard Hayes. He attached the buffers. He set a trigger. If his terminal lost power, if the cell door opened, if the admin token tried to revoke his credentials, the package would fire to 10 places at once. Hayes lifted the bullhorn again, measured and cool. This assembly is now dispersed. If you remain, you will be detained. The pronunciation of detained was so even it almost sounded like help. No one cheered. No one clapped. A kind of hush took the edges off the noise, the hush that comes after you watch a wave hit and realize the beach is still there. Altered, littered with what it took, but there. Officers loosened their shoulders by a half-inch. A city worker zipped the debris cart's cover. The camera on a volunteer legal observer's chest recorded a gloved hand sweeping letters into a plastic bag. Frank touched the top of Rex's head and felt the heat of the dog's ear under his palm. "We're all right," he lied. He pressed the heel of his hand to the cut above his ear until the bleeding slowed. He rolled his shoulder and winced where the baton had found old fracture. He looked down at the spot where his tent had been and wondered stupidly if anyone had grabbed the dented pot. He almost laughed. A man can bleed and still worry about a pot. It's one of the few ways to stay human. Maria counted Diego's breaths until she found a rhythm and could stand on it. A stranger with a blue bandana offered her a bottle of water. She took a small sip, swished, spit pavement, then handed it to the boy. He drank like water had been invented just for that moment. Alia gathered her scattered pages with slow, clumsy hands. Most were boot prints now, smears and rips. She didn't cry. She slid the one surviving sheet into her backpack. Careful as if it were glass. The livestream's chat slowed from flood to stream. The comments didn't agree with each other. They never would. But a thread ran through. Names, times, the kind of details that make memory harder to erase. Above them, cars flowed along the overpass like nothing at all had happened. People headed to dinner, to gyms, to babysitters and therapy. A city is good at holding two realities at once. Ethan stared at the cursor, blinking at the end of the last line of his dispatch. The one where he had written not a conclusion but a beginning. Here is the part of the truth they will try to rename. He hovered over send and thought about fear. His own and everybody else's. He clicked. Hayes turned away from the crowd with a practiced neutrality and spoke into the mic clipped at his shoulder. "Phase complete," he said. He did not say what the phase had done. He did not say what he felt, if he felt. He walked past a crumpled page on the ground without looking, and his boot left a clean tread across charcoal lines that had once been the curve of a dog's ear. Somewhere under the overpass, a portable radio crackled with static and then collapsed back into silence. Somewhere above it, a woman in an elevator touched her hair in the mirror. The city, being a city, moved on. But under the concrete, in lungs, in the ache in a veteran's shoulder, in graphite dust under a child's nails, in a file now copied 100 times, Part 3 of the story refused to be over. It lodged where stories lodge when they have nowhere else to go in nerves. In inboxes, in the stubborn space between the truth of what you saw and the lie you dared to accept. Smoke lingered long after the officers packed up. It clung to hair, to jackets, to the corners of lungs that wouldn't stop coughing. The ground under the Westbridge overpass was a ruin, scraps of nylon, a broken stroller, footprints stamped into blankets. Frank sat on the curb, jacket torn, Rex's head on his knee. His ear was still bleeding. Someone had wrapped a strip of cloth around it, but the cloth was already red. He stared at the wreckage without speaking. He had fought in wars. He had seen villages burned. But something about watching your own city treat its poor the same way made the hurt different. Deeper. Maria crouched nearby, rocking Diego. The boy had stopped crying, but his eyes looked hollow, like he'd aged years in a single night. A volunteer brought him a cookie in a plastic bag. He bit it slowly, silent. Maria whispered thanks, though the volunteer had already moved on to hand out bottled water to others. Alia picked at her scraped palms. She kept glancing at her backpack as if afraid someone might steal the single surviving page inside. She wanted to go home, to crawl under her blanket and hide. But part of her wanted to stay, to tell Frank she had drawn him strong. She didn't. Words stuck in her throat. Across town, Ethan Cole's dispatch began to move. It leaked into inboxes of journalists, into the feed of a watchdog site, into private chat groups that knew how to recognize gold when they saw it. For now, no one knew his name. But the videos spoke for themselves. Shaky clips of batons hitting backs, body cam footage of orders given, the hiss of gas rolling across asphalt. The city would call it a riot. Ethan had made sure there was proof it. WASN single quotes D. Captain Hayes, meanwhile, sat in his office, uniform crisp, file open. His after-action report read clean. Enforcement completed. Minimal resistance. No injuries requiring hospitalization. He signed his name with steady hand. Outside his window, Ravenwood glittered, all towers and lights. He didn't look at the news feeds. He didn't need to. He knew they'd spin the way they always spun. Chaos, disorder, officers restoring peace. Still, a small shadow crossed his face as he rubbed his thumb against the ridge of his wedding ring. For a moment, just a moment, he thought of the girls. Voice in the fog. Stop. High, cracked, true. Then the thought closed like a door. Later that night, the mayor's spokesperson held a press conference. She called the sweep necessary for public safety. Reporters asked about the footage circulating online. She said, context matters. Some individuals were aggressive. She said, we must trust law enforcement. Her earrings glittered. Under the lights, on the streets, no one trusted anything. Frank limped down an alley with Rex, clutching the bent pot he had salvaged. Every step was a reminder of bones that healed wrong. People looked at him like he was invisible, until Rex barked once, sharp. Then they crossed the street. Maria and Diego slept on the floor of a church gymnasium, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Diego tossed in his sleep, mumbling, "Don't push me." Maria lay awake, eyes on the ceiling, whispering prayers. She wasn't sure she believed. Aaliyah sat at her desk at home, the rescued page spread before her. She stared at it till her eyes blurred. Then she began to draw again, hand shaking but determined. This time she drew Captain Hayes, but not as he looked. She drew him as she saw him, a giant looming over tiny figures, eyes blank, mouth open in a command no one wanted to hear. Around his feet, smoke curled like chains. And Ethan, back in his cell, stared at the blinking cursor on his screen. The leak was out, but he knew what came next. They'd hunt him. They'd trace the breach. He'd bought himself hours, maybe days, not more. He pressed his palms to his eyes, then to the keyboard again. He couldn't stop. Not now. The city had shifted. Something invisible but heavy had cracked. Frank had thought the worst was over. That the gas, the batons, the shouting, those were the blows. But Ravenwood wasn't done. The city always had one more way to punish the people at the bottom. 2 nights after Westbridge, a patrol car rolled slow through Jefferson Square. Its headlights swept over benches, over the fountain, over Frank and Rex curled on a patch of concrete. Frank stirred awake at the glare. Rex lifted his head, ears stiff. The officer in the passenger seat leaned out the window. "You can't sleep here, old man. Move along." Frank rubbed his eyes. "This is public space." "I ain't hurting anyone." The cop smirked. "Public doesn't mean you. Get up," Rex growled, low and steady. The driver unbuckled his seatbelt. "Leash that mutt or he's coming with us." Frank stood slowly, palms out. "Don't you touch him. He's all I got." That was enough. Doors slammed, boots hit pavement, and hands shoved Frank against the fountain. His cheek scraped the stone. A knee pinned his back. Rex barked, straining against the leash until one officer swung a baton dangerously close to the dog's skull. "Stop," Frank roared, voice ragged. "He's a service dog. He served this country," but no one listened. To them it was just noise. They cuffed his wrists, cold steel biting into old bones. Rex whined, frantic, until another officer yanked his leash and dragged him toward the squad car. Across the square, a few bystanders filmed on their phones. One muttered, "Damn, they're arresting a veteran?" Another shook her head. "Doesn't matter, they'll spin it." Maria heard about it at the shelter the next morning. She was ladling oatmeal into Diego's bowl when a woman whispered, "They took the old vet last night, the one with the dog." Maria froze. "Frank?" The woman nodded. "Cops said he resisted." She spat the word like poison. Maria sat down. Hard, spoon clattering. Diego looked up, eyes wide. "Mama, is the dog okay?" Maria didn't answer. She didn't know. Aaliyah saw the video before school. Someone had uploaded it. Frank's face pressed to the fountain. Rex yanked by the collar. Officers shouting over his protests. She played it again and again, her chest tight. In class, when the teacher asked about current events, Aaliyah raised her hand for the first time all year. "They arrested a homeless veteran last night," she said. "He wasn't doing anything." The teacher blinked, uncomfortable. "That's unfortunate, but let's stay on topic." "No," Aaliyah said louder. "This is the topic." Her voice shook, but she didn't stop. "You tell us to respect the police, but I saw them hurt people. I saw it." Silence. The other kids stared. The teacher shifted, flustered. "Aaliyah, that's enough." But it wasn't enough. Not anymore. Ethan saw the same video hit the networks he had seeded. His code had worked. The footage couldn't be buried. But the system fought back fast. City press releases branded Frank a transient with violent tendencies. They painted Rex as aggressive. The tags in the database updated in real time. Dawson Frank, arrested. Dog impounded. Risk level, high. Ethan slammed his fist on the desk. They're rewriting him while he's still bleeding. His chest heaved. He typed furiously, digging deeper, finding the contracts, data-sharing agreements between Ravenwood PD and a conglomerate that profited off risk scoring. Every eviction, every arrest, every record fed the machine, and the machine paid back. In millions. His heart hammered. He thought of Frank's eyes, Maria's prayers, Aaliyah's sketchbook. They weren't statistics. They were the city's soul. And the city was selling it. That night, Maria stood outside the precinct, Diego's, hand in hers. She had come to ask about Frank, about Rex, maybe to leave a blanket for him. But the desk sergeant smirked when he saw her. "You here to post bail? That'll be $500 cash." Maria shook her head. "I don't have." Then he stays. "Dog too. You can't pay, you can't play." Diego tugged her sleeve. "Mama, can't we help him?" Maria swallowed hard. "We will," she whispered, though she had no idea how. Back home, Aaliyah drew furiously. She sketched Frank behind bars, Rex howling outside. She drew Maria and Diego standing in the cold. She drew Captain Hayes with hands of stone. The lines cut deep into the page, as if pressure alone could carve justice into being. She didn't know it, but her sketches were about to matter. Soon someone would see them, and they would spread. Ethan stared at his code, at the blinking cursor, at the choice forming in front of him. He could sit quiet and save himself. Or he could push everything, live every contract, every video, every lie. He thought of Hayes's voice. "Justice is whatever we decide it is." "No," Ethan whispered. "Not anymore." His fingers moved. The city was about to choke on its own secrets. Frank Dawson had been processed like a package. Fingerprinted, photographed, his jacket taken, his dignity stripped with the snap of latex gloves. They gave him a thin blanket and a cot that smelled of bleach. But the hardest part wasn't the cuffs or the concrete. It was the silence where Rex should have been. He lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, hearing phantom paws clicking against the floor. Once, when he closed his eyes, he saw muzzle flash from 20 years ago. But when he opened them, all he saw was a cell door. Maria Alvarez couldn't sleep either. Diego tossed on the church gym floor, muttering, "Don't push me," over and over, his small fists clenching even in dreams. Maria stroked his hair and whispered, "You're safe, Mio." But she knew he wasn't. Not really. In the morning, she returned to the precinct. Not for Frank, she had no money for bail, but for Rex. The desk sergeant laughed when she asked, "Lady, that dog's impounded. Property of the city now." "Property?" she repeated, stunned. "He's not a thing. He's his partner." The sergeant shrugged. "Not anymore." She left shaking, Diego clinging to her hand. At Roosevelt Middle, Aaliyah carried her sketchbook like it was armor. She showed Maria the drawing by chance, when they crossed paths at the shelter where Maria served soup to other mothers. "That's Frank," Maria whispered, eyes wide. "You know him?" Aaliyah asked. Maria nodded. "They arrested him." "Took his dog." Aaliyah's throat tightened. "I saw it. I drew it." The two looked at each other, a woman worn raw by survival and a girl trembling with the need to be believed. Between them, the sketchbook lay open, Frank's bent shoulders, Rex's glowing eyes, Maria's own figure sketched into the crowd. It was the first time Maria felt seen. The first time Aaliyah felt she wasn't crazy. That night, a note slipped under Maria's cot. Folded tight, no name. "I know what they're doing. They're selling us. Data, files, lives. I have proof. But I can't do this alone." There was an email address written in shaky letters. Maria hesitated. She didn't know if it was a trap, but something in her gut told her, whoever wrote this knew the truth. She showed the note to Aaliyah the next day. The girl's eyes lit up. "We should answer," Aaliyah said. Maria swallowed. "And say what?" "That we believe him." In his cell, Ethan Cole checked the burner inbox. A single message blinked back. 3 words, nothing more. "We believe you." He stared at the screen until his vision blurred. For the first time since this began, he wasn't alone. The next morning, Maria took Diego to the courthouse where Frank was being arraigned. Aaliyah skipped school and came too, clutching her sketchbook. In the hallway, they saw Frank let in, wrists chained, eyes hollow. He almost didn't recognize them. But then Aaliyah held up the drawing of him and Rex, the one where she had made them saints. Frank stopped. For a moment, the guards tugged his arm, but he planted his feet. His lips trembled. "You kept it," he rasped. Aaliyah nodded. "You're not alone." Rex barked from somewhere down the hall, muffled but unmistakable. Frank's eyes filled. The guard pulled him forward. But that moment, 3 souls meeting in a courthouse corridor lit something none of them could name. Ethan saw The clip later. Someone in the hallway had filmed it, shaky but clear. A homeless vet stopping mid-chain. A girl showing him a drawing, a mother and child standing behind them like witnesses. It spread online under a single caption, "We are not trash." And, for the first time, the city began to believe it. Frank sat in the holding cell waiting for his public defender, but he already knew how it would go. The city would brand him a drunk, a vagrant, a man who snapped. They'd use his PTSD like a weapon against him. He had seen it happen to others, brothers in arms chewed up and spit out by the system, but he hadn't expected this. That morning, Hayes himself walked into the precinct with a black leather folder. He stopped in front of Frank's cell, cold eyes staring. "You think you're a hero, Dawson. You're just a liability. And liabilities get erased." Frank rose from the cot, fury in his chest. "You don't scare me, Hayes. Not anymore." Hayes smirked, pulled a paper from the folder, and slid it through the bars. Frank froze. It was a notice of animal destruction order. Rex was scheduled to be put down within 72 hours. Frank's fists pounded the bars. "You son of a, he's my partner. He saved lives." Hayes leaned closer, his voice low and venomous. "Justice is whatever I decide it is." That same afternoon, Maria received a letter slipped into her shelter mailbox. Official city seal. Her breath caught as she read, "Notice of removal. You are occupying public property illegally. Failure to vacate will result in arrest." She crumpled the letter in her fist, eyes burning. Diego tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, what does it mean?" Maria knelt, holding him tight. "It means they want to take our home away, Mio, again." Aaliyah overheard her teachers whispering in the lounge, her outburst in class, the drawings circulating online. She was now flagged as a problem student. She saw her file open on the screen when one teacher forgot to close the laptop, red marks, warnings, even the word violent tendencies. She was 12. Her stomach knotted. They were rewriting her future before she'd even had one. Meanwhile, Ethan's hack had unearthed something worse than he imagined. Buried deep in the Ravenwood contracts, he found the key, a multinational security conglomerate, Orbis Systems, paying millions for access to police databases. The more arrests, the more incidents, the more profit. Every eviction order, every resistance to arrest, every flagged child, every destroyed. It was all feeding the machine. Weeks later, a mural appeared on the courthouse wall. It showed Frank, standing tall with Rex at his side. Maria and Diego beside them, Aaliyah holding her sketchbook open to the crowd. Behind them, faceless figures of every color and age, fists raised together. At the bottom, in bold letters, were the words that had shaken the city: "We are not trash." By dawn, the smoke had cleared, but the scars remained. A man was gone, yet his sacrifice lit a fire that no tear gas could extinguish. A mural rose from the ashes, 3 words echoing louder than any gunshot: "We are not trash. The struggle is not over. And neither is ours." If this story moved you, subscribe now, because together we can make sure their voices are never silenced again.